We are going today to talk about iridology. We're going to clear up the confusion, the myths, and the fables. We're going to talk about things that are out there that should not be out there anymore, that have had the science done that shows that these are no longer valid. I'd like to introduce myself a little bit to give some credibility to why I feel very qualified to share this information with you. I have been in the holistic health industry for over 4 decades. I started out in about 1979, starting to study herbology, nutrition, iridology, all that kind of stuff. This is what I did instead of finishing university to be a school teacher. I got into holistic healing because I had some health problems back there, in my late teens, early 20s, and the doctors seemed to be very unable to give me any answers, to give me any direction. They just were not, they weren't being helpful in any way, shape, or form. I expected more from them, and I certainly didn't get what I was expecting. So I lucked into meeting a fellow who I thought was really quite adorable, quite handsome in every way, shape, and form. He was sweet, he was kind, he was smart. He knew a little bit about herbs. We started dating, and long story short, we got married. And he taught me everything that he knew. And I ran with it. I just ran with it. We've started our family. We will be celebrating 41 years in July, in just about 2.5 or 3 weeks. We're pretty excited about that. But over the years, I have studied and I've moved forward with this. I do a lot of work with infertility, high-risk pregnancy. As my clientele is aging, I've now got 2nd and 3rd generation clients. I'm doing a lot of work with menopause because that's the age group we are all moving, many of us are moving into. And I just love what I do. Over the years, I have written several books that I've self-published and self-distributed because I didn't know how to do it any other way. And so it was Pregnancy Naturally, The Herbal Birth Kit Handbook, Healthy Kids Naturally, The Essential Guide to Nature's Sunshine Products, Biokinesiology and Color Therapy, Levels 1 and 2, and my most recent textbook about 5 years ago, The Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology Textbook, which is the book that my students in my iridology course use. I've also created and taught a lot of courses over the years. Kinga, it's good to see you. I love it that you're from Calgary. That's where I'm from too. So that's cool. And we've got Vinocha. Thank you for joining us. And we've got R.L. Karras is from West Virginia. Welcome, welcome. So I've also created and taught a lot of courses over the years. Herbology Level 1, many years ago, was a 20-hour program to teach people how to use commercially prepared herbs in their families. And my students loved that so much that we developed a Level 2, which was 16 hours of advanced training in herbal use for family application. A lot of those students actually went on to begin advising other people, and they started businesses based on that, which is pretty exciting. They've continued their studies and they've built on that. Also developed and taught Biokinesiology and Color Therapy Level 1 and 2. For several years, I was a certified childbirth educator with the ICEA, so I developed and taught prenatal classes. And of course, most recently, and this is about 5 years ago, I became a certified prenatal, or not a certified prenatal educator, no, that's over and done, certified iridology instructor with the International Iridology Practitioners Association. Hello, the Healing Homestead, good to see you. And One Loke Diva, good to see you too. Thanks for joining us. Again, love it when you say hello to me, whether you're with me on the webinar, Facebook, or Instagram. It just helps me to know. It actually gives me energy so that I can give you more good stuff. I'd love it if you'd stay with me to the very end of our time today. I'm going to just share with you about 2 minutes worth of information about an upcoming course. I am the proud member of the Canadian Association of Holistic Nutrition Professionals and a proud member of CANP, as well as a proud member of the Alberta Herbalist Association. I have nutrition credentials from 2 different schools, and I maintain memberships in these 2 professional organizations that you see on the screen. I've also studied herbology with, I don't know how many different teachers in schools, and iridology with 8 different teachers. right? 3 different styles. So I do feel that I'm quite well qualified to share with you information about about the things that we used to teach about iridology, because these are things that I learned 4 decades ago that I used. And as new research came out and as I realized that what I was doing wasn't working, I adopted the new research and upgraded what I was doing. Right? What's the definition of insanity? Continuing to do the same thing and expecting different results, right? And that's where I was way back then, because I kept doing iridology the way I'd been taught and it wasn't working. So I had to change something. I love questions and comments. So I'd love it if you've got questions and comments, just throw them into whatever platform you're using and I will address them as appropriate. And if they aren't appropriate during the presentation itself, we'll tag on a few minutes at the very end to address them there. Hi, Athiba, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. And Durya, good to see you. Thanks for being there. All right, so let's start with one of the original things that I'm going to call an original myth. This is the owl story, and the owl story has so many different iterations. We know that it was a little boy named Ignaz van Petzele. He was about 11 years old. That's the only thing that we know for sure. Other than that, we know that bird was involved, some kind of a bird of prey, whether it was a hawk or an owl. We know that Ignaz somehow came into possession of this bird, whether he trapped it, caught it, found it. We know that at some point in time, this bird sustained an injury, whether it had a broken wing or a leg, and Ignaz was able to catch it that way, or whether it got injured in a trapping process, whatever, we don't know. And so with that, that's all we know. We know that he says he saw a black line form in the owl's eye, and that as the owl healed, the line went away. Well, here's the challenge that we have with this, because we don't know which version is correct, and we don't know what he actually saw. Bill Caradonna says this: the modern iridology can't explain the owl's story. Von Petzele's story from a very long time ago has not been reproduced, so it is a waste of time to repeat it. It just creates confusion. Critical thinking is required when applied to any topic. So what we want to remember here is that, as Bill continued, if you looked at a picture of an owl's eye or most animals, what we find is the structure of their iris is different from a human being. So we can't extrapolate what happens in a bird eye to what happens in a human eye. It's not doable. And we also know that with this difference, even in the owl eye, what Ignaz claims he saw is not possible. Wouldn't you think that after all of these years, there's been so many facilities set up to take wild birds and wild animals that have been injured, put them into a care facility, heal them up, get them all better, and then gradually release them back into the wild? Don't you think that if this kind of a thing where the iris was changing like that could happen in a bird, that it would have been recorded in one of these wild bird sanctuaries? Don't you think a tech there would have seen something like this over these last decades? Yet no one has ever mentioned this. So now what I'm saying with this is, I want you to know that while I don't believe the owl story, what I do believe is that Ignaz somehow got triggered into wanting to understand if the eyes could give us information. And his experience with the owl was enough to spur him on, so that he actually became a medical doctor, and he started drawing by hand in colored charcoals his patients' eyes and writing down their stories, and then correlating things that he saw in several eyes to their stories, and began that way to create an iris map. So regardless of what it was, what he thinks he saw, I'm grateful to him that it led him down a road of doing research. That was just absolutely brilliant. So one of the myths that we are looking at right now is the myth that's, let's monitor your progress and look for changes in your irides. Now, so a couple of things on this one. Number one, irides don't typically change very quickly. And number two, but we'll see some changes in the sclera, in the white of the eye, not so much in the iris of the eye. Number two is that the irides accumulate things, they don't disperse them. All right, so as we look at this, these are the eyes of my husband. This is his left eye. The image on the left was taken when he was 42 with a print film camera. It was an Olympus professional grade camera. The image on the right was taken with my Canon 24 megapixel with an LED light. Many people who are using outdated iridology would look at this and say the image on the right is so much bluer, he must have done an awful lot of cleansing. No, that is not the case. I mean, we do eat well, we do take supplements, we take good care of our health. This is the result of cleansing. This is the result of a difference in technology. This was an incandescent light, which tends to be more blue, or sorry, more yellow. This is an LED light, which tends to be more blue. And as you know from theater lighting, if you've ever seen a live play, they use colored filters that they shine on the screen, and it changes the lights and it changes the appearance of colors. That's exactly what's happened here. This is not cleansing. So if we're doing anything that's before and after, we need to be very careful that we use the exact same technology on the exact same settings, because I can take this 24 megapixel camera, and by changing something as simple as the white balance, by changing the f-stop, by changing the shutter speed, I can actually change to a certain extent or completely, as the case may be, the color of this iris, the way the skin tones show up. So this is a myth that we can monitor changes in the irides using photos. I also want you to notice this. Can you see this pigment down here? Notice that it's not in the older picture. This is an accumulated pigment. The difference in color of these pigments as compared to these, again, has to do with the color quality, the color of the light that was in the setup, right? So we're not going to use photography to try to prove cleansing or things like that. We can use it to track accumulation of things, and we can use it to track changes in the sclera. So let's look at the sclera just a little bit here, because as we look in this upper left-hand corner, we see that 42 years ago, we had this very prominent blood vessel. And for those of you who are on Instagram, let me just refocus my camera. We've got this very prominent blood vessel up here. From his more recent picture, that blood vessel has really lightened up. It's gotten thinner. It has faded. Now we look at this little, I call it the Harry Potter scar right here. Notice how 42 years ago, it was much lighter, but in the current, the more up-to-date image, it's much heavier. So these can give us indications as to what is happening now in his body. So there we have it. Pigment is acquired. It does not disperse. I've never seen pigment disappear. And so let's go ahead and do another case study. All righty. So these are my slides. This is a case study of me in 2017. Here is my eye. Again, notice some of the color differences. And this is because when I got down to here, I wasn't thinking straight. And you'll understand why in a minute. My camera was on different settings, but I want you to focus on this area right here. In 27-9, healthy and strong, in early March of 2019, I fell, broke my arm, broke my wrist in 2 places, had surgery that day to implant 2 metal plates and 12 screws. And when you look at these images, they are still identical. There is nothing difference between pre-injury and about a week post-injury. So that's all good and fine, healed up beautifully. Then on Mother's Day, 2019, like 10 weeks later, no kidding, I fell, broke the same arm, actually broke the olecranon off, so my elbow, basically. I didn't think to take images right away, but I did do images several weeks later. So almost 2 months later, May, June, July, August, 3 months later. And we see here that the fiber structure has not changed. Oh, I did. There's my May 29. May 29. So after the first surgery, after the second break and surgery, it's all the same amount of shading between the fibers, the same fiber shape, everything. And then 3 months later, when we're fully healed, full mobility, full strength, everything is good, it is the same. So what does this tell us? This tells us that one of the other myths is that healing lines happen. Healing lines don't happen. Your eyes are the irides are inherently set. The irides are based on your genes. Breaking my arm didn't change my genes. Having surgery to implant plates and screws or little pieces of wire and pulley in my elbow, little twisted pulley things in my elbow, did not change my genetic structure. It will therefore not change the iris. Interesting that even in the sclera, there was no significant change from pre-injury to post-injury. Right? No significant change whatsoever. So something that is transient, hopefully transient like a broken bone, is not going to change the irides. So important. Again, going back to my husband's eye, the idea that that pigments are the result of toxins. I was taught that 4 decades ago, that certain colors of toxins meant certain colors of pigment meant certain toxins, an accumulation of those toxins in the eyes, and that if we did this cleansing, it would totally wash those pigments out. The eyes would become clean again. And I taught that to my clients for a decade nearly. We did cleanses, we did hardcore stuff, and it never took the pigment out of their eyes. It was frustrating. We now know from Harry Wolff, who was the man who brought constitutional iridology to life in North America. He said, in fact, it's bogus and a dogma only found among some holdouts from the Lindlar, Kritzer, and Jensen schools of thought. The notion that certain metals, minerals, toxins routinely show up as diagnostic indicators in the iris has long been refuted and proven unreliable. There is no evidence to support the notion that heavy metal toxicity is measurable in the iris, likewise drugs, candida, etc. The dark spots are genetically predetermined, as is the overall color scheme. Absolutely, absolutely. So really important that we do not use this to dictate the sale of cleanses or to talk our clients into doing cleanses. What we will see when we do a cleanse is we may see if there was some activity, some blood vessel or some discoloration in the sclera. We may see that clear up because the sclera is dynamic, the pupil is inherent. Is this making sense? Is this working for you? Okay, so here we have one eye taken on the same day with 2 different lighting setups. Now, we will often hear people talk about how fibers move in an iris. And again, I'm here to tell you they don't move, they don't disappear, they don't develop, they don't dissolve. What does happen, though, is depending on the intensity of the light, the pupil changes its size. Right? We all know that, right? Bright light pupils get small, dim light pupils get big. That's basic, right? You're looking at something that is a pleasant sight, pupils get big. You're looking at something you don't want to see, pupils can get small, right? So we know we've got these different triggers for pupil size, but I want you to pay attention as we look at this to how it changes the appearance of the fibers. When the pupil is small in this image, we can see how these fibers up here. And these are probably the best indicators. We can see that some of these look quite straight. So we're going to focus on these fibers right here. When we have that large pupil, we see that these fibers have now gone zigzaggy. Right? These are all, they've got more bends in them. They're more zigzaggy. And that's because what has happened here, I'm just going to pop my camera around, and I hope I'm well focused, is that the distance between the pupil's edge and the iris edge in the image was on the left of the screen, it's larger. Those fibers, or trabeculae they're called, are stretched out a little bit. As the pupil gets bigger, the distance between the pupil's edge and the iris edge is smaller. So it's like an accordion that has been compressed. When the pupil is large, the accordion is compressed, and that means that the bellows on the accordion are zigzaggy, just like we see in the image that's on the right of the screen. When the accordion is stretched out, the bellows stretches out, and that's what happens in the iris, is the fibers themselves get more stretched out, and that means that the fibers go straighter. So the idea that fibers change shape or change position as a result of healing activities, of better diet, better lifestyle and supplements is just all wrong. Just all wrong. When we look at this part of the eye and we see this right here, I just want you to have another look at this. Okay, so at about 3 o'clock in zone 2, we see that we have several lacunae. And as the pupil gets bigger and these fibers get compressed like this, they come together, it's going to make these lacunae look fatter. So fatter from top to bottom. As the fibers get stretched out and we come here, it makes it look like those lacunae have gotten smaller, but I want you to think of this like a balloon. If you have one of those balloons that you use to do animal shapes, right, that you do for parties, you squeeze the balloon in one place, it gets fatter in another place. You've got the same amount of air in that balloon, the same volume. You've just played with the tension on it. And that's what we've done here. The size of the pupil plays with the tension. It doesn't change the volume inside the lacuna. It simply changes where the tension is, and therefore it appears that the shape has changed, whereas it really hasn't. The impact of this lacuna has not changed. We've seen lots of people do these little diagnoses on social media where they say, you've got parasites. I can see you've got a parasite in your brain. And they're talking about these lines radiating outwards. Kinga, thank you for saying that made sense. I appreciate that. These do not tell you you've got parasites. These tell us about a lot of things, but not about parasites. Again, Harry Wolff says American sources from the turn of the 20th century are very unreliable, repetitive, and very misleading. So check your sources. What is the source of their information? Where did the iridologists who's telling you you've got parasites get their training? Very repetitive, very misleading, and with silly debunked notions like drug spots, sore itch, healing lines, parasite lines is what they used to call these things. And brown eyes turn blue with detox. Right? We don't see parasites in the brain. Parasites don't change your genetic structure. These lines give us different information about how the body functions, not about whether something has invaded your body. All right, so that's another myth that we are debunking. The idea that we can diagnose disease processes from the irides, very dangerous, very out of date. Only licensed medical practitioners are legally allowed to diagnose. Iridologists, even if we are NDs or MDs, do not diagnose from the iris. We cannot name disease from the irides. Again, I studied ginseng iridology way back in the 80s and practiced it for a decade or so. I did a lot of diagnosing back then, even though I'm not a licensed medical practitioner. And the funny thing is, I was wrong a lot of the time. And that's what was so frustrating about it. In the early 1990s, I was blessed to learn constitutional iridology and doing constitutional and understanding that this talks about inherent predispositions has just really made me be right most of the time. Because when we look at an inherent predisposition, because it's not a guarantee of a situation, we need to then ask our client, what is their history? Do they have a history of symptoms? We need to ask them what their diet, their lifestyle is, what their supplements are, because when we're looking at inherent predispositions, our client may be doing all the right things to prevent that problem from actually manifesting. Does that make sense? And so when we see that they actually do have a symptom, they've got a problem, and it correlates to a marking in the eye helps us to understand why they have the problem. And that then helps us to understand the best course of action to suggest to them. This is so important that we do not diagnose, we do not prescribe. Bill Caradonna, who was my constitutional teacher, says this: iridology cannot be used to diagnose. It is a unique assessment tool to gain understanding of the blueprint of the body, including tendencies towards illness patterns or the assessment of resiliency and resistance against negative influences. But diagnosing the presence or status of an illness or disease is never appropriate. For the past several years, I have been teaching constitutional iridology to wellness practitioners like you. And I will tell you that understanding the art and the science of constitutional iridology will help you so many ways in your work with your clients. So with that, understanding that we don't diagnose, we don't prescribe, we're not going to see the Irides change because of things we suggest, I would like to take just a moment or two to introduce the upcoming course. The Dynamic Iridology Assessment System is the only live, online, fully mentored course for nutritionists, herbalists, and naturopaths who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. When you do client work, how much time do you spend outside of your client sessions creating protocols? I'm here to tell you that's a waste of time. If it takes you that long to create a protocol, you're giving your client too much information. They're going to have a hard time sticking with all of it. And so with constitutional iridology, my endeavor, my goal, my aim is to help you understand iridology at a level that will help you to do an iris assessment, as well as create your client programs right in your paid client sessions, to create programs that are doable. So your client will actually have success. They will, I call them next step programs. You only want to take them up one step at a time so they can achieve that success in a very logical, sequential way. In doing that, your client will see success. They'll be able to stick with the program. And in doing that, you will earn their trust. They will keep coming back. I have got clients that have been with me for 39 years now. Like I said earlier, I've got many second and third generation clients, which is so exciting. It's so fun to work with the children and the grandchildren of clients that I started my practice with decades ago. And so the course Dynamic Iridology Assessment System is coming up again. It will be starting in September, and we have all of the details coming up on Wednesday, June 30th. We're doing an info session to give you all of the details. And so I would love it if you would join me for that. You can see the registration link on the screen. tinyurl.com/2021-June-30, and the capital letters, the uppercase letter is important for June. So on Wednesday, June 30th, 12 noon Mountain Time, that's 11 Pacific, 1 Central, 2 Eastern, 3 Atlantic Time. We'll spend an hour and a half to 2 hours talking about how iridology can be of benefit to you in your practice. Also talking about what's involved in the course, what is the training, what is the support, what is involved in becoming a certified iridologist with the International Iridology Practitioners Association. We'll talk about the support I give you through the certification process. We'll talk about tuition options, payment plans. We'll talk about how long the support continues after you finish your course and after you finish your certification, so that you will be able to see if this course is a good fit for you. Excellent. And so a question from Martha. Tips to help detox from vaccination as related to iris signs. We do not see any markers in an iris related to vaccination. And I know there is some thought out there that, I just need to make sure that, okay, good, that's still recording. Some thought out there that vaccine damage causes autism. That may be true in some cases, it's not true in all cases. For example, I have a severely autistic granddaughter who was never vaccinated. And so tips to help detox, we wouldn't be talking about detox as based on the eyes. We would be talking about detox as based on symptoms, right? And depending on which vaccination you're talking about, the various vaccines that have been approved under emergency use, there is no detoxing from them, period, because of the damage they do to the DNA. But detoxing other vaccines, that should be done as soon as the vaccine is given. Like if you're in a situation where the vaccine has to be given right away, then you literally, as soon as it's done, as soon as that injection is given, you slap a poultice on the arm and you administer herbs orally to begin the detox process immediately, in my humble opinion. So that's as far as we're going to take that, because that actually doesn't really fit with everything that we're talking about today. Anyone have any questions about the myths, any myths they've heard or any things that they've heard about iridology that they think could be a myth? They want to know, is it true that iridology really can be used in that way? Those are the kinds of questions that I would love to entertain right now. And we'll give everyone just a couple of seconds to see if they want to give me a question like that. Again, to join me on Wednesday the 30th for an info session to see if the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System program is a good fit for you. And you can see the URL on the screen. All right, I am not seeing any further questions come in. Thank you so much for being with me today. If you would like to receive individual notification when I'm doing free trainings on different iridology topics, please PM your email address to me. And then do remember to check your emails, the junk, spam, and promo folders, because, you know, webinar announcements often end up there. Have a fabulous day, and I look forward to seeing you again in the very near future. You are so welcome, Kinga. I hope to see you soon. Take care and have a great day. Bye for now.